a very warm and sunny welcome. We are here together, and thanks very much everyone for joining us and also the audience on site to launch the latest SolarPower Europe report, Inverters Explained 2.0, which is marking a next step in the work that we have been doing over the last years on inverters. Last year we were all here as well in order to present the first report, which was about really shedding a light on what is an inverter. And I do think by now, policymakers and everyone else has understood what an inverter is. It is the brain of the solar system, and it is also a very important industry that we have here in Europe. Now, this report, and I also show it to the audience, Inverters 2.0, is, as I said, the next step. Because we need to make sure that the inverter industry that we have in Europe continues thriving. And we need to make sure that the inverters can play their very important role to the fullest extent in the energy transition, in integrating solar into the system, and in making this energy transition happening. I am here with some of the most important inverter companies that we have in Europe. We have SMA, we have Power Electronics, we have Fronius, and we have Kako. But I'm particularly honored that we have the Director General of the European Commission, Kerstin Jorna, with us. You're responsible for industrial policy in Europe, and we're very happy to have you here in order to discuss with you what is the market looking like at the moment, what does innovation has to do, and what do we need in order to make sure that the European inverter ecosystem is thriving. Over to you. Thanks for your welcoming word.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me as well. And last time I saw an inverter was in a mine, one of the oldest mines in Europe, Erzberg. And they use solar energy to actually power some of the equipment. And they had a huge inverter inside the solar park that they had. The prospects for inverters are great, like for the solar ecosystem in itself. On inverters, I understand the demand tripled in the last years, so that's good. But your report also shows that there are quite some clouds on the horizon. Only 1 out of the 10 biggest inverter companies is European. Europe had a market share, of 20%, and that's melting rapidly. Climate change. Also, when it comes to costs, your competitors are offering, 70% below your offerings, which is huge as a cost gap. So the question is, what can, in this difficult weather conditions, what can a European umbrella actually offer? And first I want to say, we care. We care about your industry and we care about your business case. And we care about the business case because it's also a public good that you're producing. Your equipment actually helps to stabilize the integrity of our electricity system. And your product also helps us, and your production helps us not to be totally dependent on one region. We know what it means to be dependent for our energy on one region, one country. We've learned it really the hard way in Europe. And so we want to work with you. And how do we care? First of all, there is the Net Zero Industry Act, which is the first legislation, I would say, of its kind in the single market that builds on a business case. And the business case is that when you want to produce equipment, you need access to land, access to finance, access to skills, and access to market. And that's exactly the 4 pillars of the Net Zero Industry Act, which covers in the scope your industry. Access to land means permitting. We've harmonized for the whole of the European market the permitting rules. It's 12 months until you or your investor know, can I do it or can I not do it? It's the same procedure everywhere in Europe. It's digital by default. It's a one-stop shop. It's stop-the-clock elements. So it's one of the most modern permitting procedures, I think, worldwide that you can have. Access to money means, access to finance means that we have calls for strategic projects. And these strategic projects, when they're selected, they get flag, visibility, signaling for investors as well. They get hyper-rapid access to EU funds, to public national funds, and hopefully that will also pull the relevant funds from the private sector. Access to skills, that's a real issue, and you have a very skilled workforce that works with you. But we're opening later today the Skills Academy for solar. And then access to market, this was the mostly debated point, is how we can make sure that there's a preference for products produced in Europe, produced in a sustainable, cyber-resilient way in all public procurement auctions and also subsidy schemes. So Net Zero Industry Act is an incredible empowering tool. We also have the Cyber Resilience Act, and we will build a lot on the Cyber Resilience Act because for all equipment, it has 5 requirements. The first is that you need the access needs to be controlled. Then we need to be sure that the data that are stored are protected and that they are integrated. We need to monitor the system on a regular basis. We need to protect the surface against attacks, and we need to be cyber resilient by design. These 5 criteria, every equipment will be checked on this before it can get into the European market, which means it will be more difficult to outcompete you on the European market. And we also expect public authorities, when they procure, and we need to completely revisit our electricity grid, that will play a role. And then I want to say a word on standards. We also want to work with standards. I understood, and I want to learn more for it, that the one-phase, tri-phase, all of this is makes you have to deliver a different output to different standards. Is there something we can do to improve that, to go and capture better even the scale of the single market, which allows you to have also efficiencies of scale later on? So in conclusion, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to hear from you also a bit of the background to the how you see the weather forecast and how you prepare yourself for even maybe stormy weather, and what we can do to support it from European policy angle. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kerstin. Before we're entering into the discussion, my task is still to present the report a little bit. You have been already mentioning a number of elements. Just getting down to show everyone our poster. So as you were mentioning already, we still have a thriving ecosystem in Europe, 82 gigawatt of production that we have in Europe. That is providing more than 35,000 jobs in the inverter sector. That's 70% actually of all the jobs that we have in solar manufacturing in Europe. 20% of the market share, that has gone down. So that is not so good news, 20% of the market share. And that is because of pressure on the prices, and that is because of the level playing field that you have already been mentioning, Kerstin. What we show also in the report is to shed a little bit more light on what is an inverter, the different kinds of inverters. So there is central inverters, hybrid inverters, string inverters. We have micro inverters and power optimizers. So all of that, you can read more about it in the report. And we shed light on what needs to happen in terms of innovation and how the European manufacturing industry can be the standard setters, but also how inverters can help, as I mentioned, to integrate solar into our energy system. So we're shedding light on the smart communicator, interconnection, grid forming capabilities, and sustainability, which is an element where European companies have a cutting edge. Now, a lot of recommendations that you have already been mentioning, and I'm very happy that you're on it already in any way. The Net Zero Industry Act obviously is a milestone. So what we would like to see as a next step indeed is an IPCEI, project of common European interest, which is helping the private and the public sector to work together in a big consortium. So we hope to see that soon. Financing conditions that need to improve sustainability and resilience, EU added value that need to be the reward criteria to be taken more into account. Skills, you mentioned it as well. And then when it comes to the market, and I really hope that you can see it all, enhance cybersecurity still and work on that, reward system flexibility, because this is something more generally which still needs to be improved in order to make sure that inverters, but also flexibility more general, gets revenues, improve grid forming capabilities. And I'm coming to the end. There's a lot of elements we need to work on. Prepare for high voltage levels. That is also something I want to discuss with the panel. And promote EU standards. So thanks very much, Kerstin. A whole bundle of things that we want to discuss with the distinguished panelists. And I start with you, Katharina. SMA, so to really look a little bit at the market. You're the Senior Vice President at SMA for Communications and Sustainability. And I would like to know from you to start with how you perceive the market at this point in time. We show in the report that European manufacturing is still producing quite a bit, 82 gigawatt, but that the market share has been reduced. At the same time, you have plans to expand your production in Europe. So how do you perceive the current market? How challenging is it for a company like you?
Yes, thank you. It's indeed a challenging market, and the two of you have just outlined everything there is to outline about why it is so challenging. So we have, a market in which interest rates and, the general power, the electricity price actually put quite a bit of pressure, and the competition is fierce. So there are things to be worried about. We are, however, quite confident, and you just mentioned that we're actually going to add 20 gigawatt of capacity next year. So we will be crossing the 100 gigawatt threshold next year. Now you could ask, why are you confident? What sort of gives you this optimism? And I think I'm going to just mention two things where we are really deeply convinced that we have a competitive edge as a company, but also as an industry as a whole. The one thing is that with the rise and the growth of renewables, we see an urgent need to really add more stability and more flexibility into the grid. And you've just mentioned that that is something that is really sort of concern. And I think that, we as a company, we've been working on grid forming and flexibility for a very long time. And we really think that this is something, especially in the large-scale solar power plants, that will sort of, make a difference, will be a game changer. We do, however, need some sort of market design that rewards flexibility. So that is sort of something that is still needed, in our opinion. One other thing that we think we have a competitive edge, or at least an edge of some sort, is sustainability. And that is something where we really also need to look into how can we make sure that via an eco-design rule, for example, we can actually maintain that competitive edge and we can have that level playing field that you were talking about. So a lot of challenges in the market. And as you said, a market share that is sort of at least on the danger of dropping. But we're still confident that we can gain market share again when we play to our strength, which we all have.
Thanks a lot, Katharina. Turning to you, Martin, to complement what Katharina just said. You are mainly producing string inverters at Fronius, and I should introduce you as well. You're the head of strategy, development and regulatory affairs for the solar business at Fronius. So what is it that, is it the same things that you perceive? Is it different for string inverters? Do you see that your business is following the general trend of the rooftop business, or are there some kind of other dynamics?
Yeah, where do I start best? Maybe just also, we also at Fronius extended our production. We invested more than 400 million euros in 22 and 23, up to a capacity for string inverters of 10 gigawatt that would be more or less around sufficient to equip 700,000 buildings per year with inverters. But I go a step back to describe our situation in the market, and I think it's also goes maybe a little bit deeper to that what Katharina already said, is in 2022, 21, 22, 23, we still were suffering a lot from supply chain issues, especially getting electronic components from the Asian market to Europe. And we already saw in quarter 2 and quarter 3 of 22 that Chinese competitors were able to flood the European market with products, while we Europeans still were not able to produce at a very low level. That led to the situation that we now have a European product made market share in Europe from very probably below 20, and that's of course a very critical situation. So everything picked up, but the market was flooded. It said that there is around 1 year inverter stock in the market currently on consumption, and that led to a price war, which is massive. We see inverters, at least in the string level area, where competitors from other regions are offering prices where we even could not compete with material costs. So that's the layer where we are currently in. Looking in the future, I still see more clouds coming, not only from the Asian side, but also from the American side. There's the IRA, which is putting a massive pressure on us again, because if I would produce an inverter 10 kW residential in the USA, I could save around 50% of manufacturing costs. We cannot be so much more efficient here in Europe to compensate 50% through these OPEX costs. So yes, there are heavy clouds around, but I'm also sharing an optimism because we are on the market, we are close. Europeans always have been very innovative to be near to the customers and find solutions, but we really need a level playing field. Otherwise, I do not see a long-term future for an inverter industry in Europe. It's very, very important.
Thanks, Martin. And probably the rooftop market at the moment having a little bit of a dip doesn't help either. So we also need to work on the demand side. But indeed, thanks for your first reactions. There is some clouds on the horizon, but also some optimism, some sun rays. Yeah.
I forget to say that, yes, we also see I would even say a almost dramatic drop in the residential installations in many markets. Benelux, Germany, Austria, the residential markets were shrinking compared to last year, quarter 1, by partially 30 or 40%, and that's massive.
Yeah. So also the demand not continuing at the moment to grow substantially is adding to that. Thanks very much. So turning to you, Carlos. Carlos Lombardio, Chief Customer and Corporate Strategy Officer at Power Electronics, the biggest inverter company manufacturer in Europe, and you're based in Spain. I would like to leave a little bit the market space and how it looks on the market at this point in time, and talk about innovation, which also holds a very important point in our report, with a focus on grid forming and communication capacities. So in terms of innovation, what are you looking at? What are your challenges at Power Electronics? Maybe you can shed a little bit light on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think Catherine has mentioned it. For us, grid forming is an important point. I mean, because it's gonna give stability to the system. So,
and maybe you could explain quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
What grid forming is.
Yeah, well, the traditional source of energy, I mean, based on fossil fuels, are being replaced by the renewable one. That results in a lack of, it's a bit technical, but a lack of inertia in the grid. What the traditional control systems are grid following, so they just follow the grid. Now, this grid forming that make in some kind intelligent our inverter just to react to the necessities of the grid. So they provide a stability to the system, and that's the reason why it is important for us. But I mean, it's an innovation, but but really we have been working for a long time in grid farming. We have several projects around the world. We have a huge increase in the demand by our clients this year, above all in the Australian market, and this is an opportunity for the European manufacturers, because, well, the point with the grid farming is that the requirements are not the same depending on the grid. So there is a lot of difference between the markets. So the fact that some of the European manufacturers have expertise in develop the grid farming in other countries could help the European institutions just to standardize these requirements along the different European market, in order to have these homogeneous requirements, and help the manufacturers and the manufacturers could help these TSOs to make this standardization.
So we need to talk to grid operators, so that is something that we're already planning, and standardization plays a very important role. Turning to you now, Matthias Haag, you're the Chief Technology Officer of CACO. A little bit similar question. What are you looking at when you look at innovation at CACO, and what are the things you're struggling with?
Yeah, I mean, the colleagues have already mentioned a lot of topics that we are currently facing. Innovation for us, and if we look at innovation, and if I look to the companies that are here in the forum, I mean, every company has its own DNA, and everybody is interpreting innovations in a different kind of way. Everybody has its sweet spots and its strengths. We always focus on two main aspects. The one is technological leadership, and the other one is sustainability. And both, of course, both comes with a price. And what we see in the market is that somehow these benefits have to be respected in the rules of our industry. To be a little bit more precise, I mean, we have been the ones who introduced in mass production silicon carbide semiconductors to reach highest efficiencies with the inverters. That leads to higher yields. That pays off over the lifetime of a system. But if I compete with a, let's say, inverter that has less efficiency, that is cheaper for the customer, it seems to be attractive when he buys the inverter. At the end of the day, you know, he pays the bill as its system is not operating in an optimal way. But as you know, currently everybody's looking on the money. Often the customers decide on a capex cost and not on the opex costs of a system. So this is something where it becomes difficult to convince customers to pay a premium in the price to get a premium product. So this is the one. The other topic is sustainability. We are a 100% daughter company of Siemens, and we have very strict rules for designing and producing sustainable products from Siemens. So we're making sure that we use the right materials, let's say from suppliers that are around us, and reflecting all these topics also comes with a price. And also here, I mean, somebody has to pay the price, but we're a sustainable industry, and therefore our product should also be produced in a sustainable way. And if we compete, you know, we are supplying our production side with 100% renewable energy. If I produce somewhere on the world based on let's say coal power plants, this is something different. And so we are, you know, we want to keep this sustainability. We want to keep this technological leadership, but therefore we need some support. And this is also linked to, let's say, that we also need support from research institutes that we also have in Germany. So we're the inverter industry, but we also have some supporters out there that help us to keep our technological leadership. And also these guys are helping us in keeping that alive.
So what you're saying is indeed you need the right market conditions, but we also need innovation in order to make sure that we're, keeping this structural, strategic advantage. And this is why I'm turning to you again, Kerstin, because what we are proposing, and that's our flagship proposal, is that we are working together in Europe around an IPCEI, around a project of important European interest, together with member states, together with the European Commission. And I know that there's some very important discussions with member states coming up where they want to support these kind of IPCEIs. So maybe you could more generally react to what you heard, but then also specifically inform us a little bit more about what the further process is and how we could get to a point where we have an IPCEI for inverters.
Listening to you, I take it that you do not need a safety belt to be thrown into the flood that's coming, but it's more, something to tow, a big towing boat with standards, certainly facilitating your business case and your production facilities. I hope that there will be many strategic projects also to apply for, so that there is this access to finance as well, and that for research and innovation we continue to support that with our instruments. And IPCEI is something that was in the treaty for many years and allows certain flexibilities when it comes to state aid, but it's in the treaty itself. In particular, taking innovation beyond, the TRL scale, also into first deployment. And it was in the treaty for many years, but it wasn't used. And then we started using it, but at the rate of 1 or 2 IPCEIs per year. And then when we created the industrial alliances, in particular the Hydrogen Alliance, all of a sudden we had hundreds of projects for IPCEIs. So we are scaling up in treating. We have now on batteries, on hydrogen, we have several IPCEIs already. But behind it is the initial trigger is the member states and a group of member states. Cannot be only one member state. So I think the most important is the people who are lacking in this room or missing, because I don't see any member states here. That's the ones that have to get into. They have the towing boat, really, to do this. We, as I said, we were scaling, and when you scale, you sometimes too much at the time. So we had discussions with our member states who said, you take too long, Commission, it's a black box, we don't know what's happening. And then we turned to them and said, yeah, well, you send us very complicated applications, we have to go through, there are mistakes in it. And then the member states say, yeah, but we didn't know what to send, so in case of doubt, we send everything. You as companies, or not you at this stage, but the companies complained and said, yeah, but we have to give all this information, we don't know what it will be used for. And what we now see, unfortunately, also on some of the IPCEIs is that now the decisions have been taken, first investment decisions are lacking, the money is not flowing. So there's a lot to improve, and that's why, together with the member states, we created an IPCEI forum, which is more on the design of the IPCEIs to make it easier, the process, more predictable, and also for the not-ins or the not-yet-ins of member states in certain IPCEIs, it allows them to see very early on that they could be part of it. We had a first meeting of this forum, a high-level forum. I don't think inverters are on the radar yet. So there's work to do, I would say, but you need member states to champion it. And if you are fast, you might be one of the first IPCEIs to actually benefit from this simplified, more transparent rules that we're imagining around the handling of an IPCEI process, from design to first investment decision. Because I would really want to insist that we have to go the whole Monty.
But thanks for giving us a little bit more insights in the process. The good news is that the inverter companies represented here are from different parts of Europe, from Spain, from Germany, from Austria. So we do hope that these member states are the first ones who are jumping on an IPCEI, and we will do our part of it. Now, turning to you again, Katharina, what would such an IPCEI mean for you as a German company, as a SMA? Would it be that towing boat that you need?
Well, I like the picture actually, because you're right. We don't need that safety belt or that safety hoop. I'm just going to go back one step maybe and explain a little bit again, why is it important? Because innovation sometimes and technological leadership, that sounds like something that is in our DNA, that should come easy to us, but it's actually not easy. And that's why an IPCEI would be a really smart tool, I think. If you think about an inverter, it's really a very complex machine, so to speak. It's all about the power electronics, and it is really something where innovation and technological leadership comes at a price and is really, really complex. So we are, not to brag here, but we're really much more complex than modules, for example, just as a machine. And that is why innovation is something that is extremely complex. It takes a long time, and it is sort of not something that is just, done easily. So I think support on that side, support with the innovation side of it, and bundling forces in Europe to do exactly that, that could really help us, again, put our competitive edge that we have, that these companies in this room already have, but that could put us sort of let's say on the forefront of the innovation here. And I think this is extremely important because, let's be honest, we are probably never going to be able to compete on price with our Chinese competitors. That is not going to happen. And then you need to compete on other things like sustainability, like quality, like innovation. Or, you need to be able to look into technologies like grid forming, which we just discussed. But all of that is complex, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money to sort of look into these things and to be on the forefront of it. So that's why we really think that bundling forces of member states, of companies, bundling sort of the intelligence that we have in this industry, that could be really something to help us maintain our competitive edge.
Thanks a lot. Strengthening the internal market more generally will be very important because we cannot compete as single countries, but particularly when it comes to inverters and IPCEI would really help to bundle the efforts and really maintain the competitive edge that we have and further develop it. You mentioned price. I would like to turn to you, Martin, now to look into one of the other elements that we mentioned already, part of the puzzle, which is reward of EU added value. So the Net Zero Industry Act that you mentioned, Kerstin, which is a great achievement, I would say, from the European Commission, now has to be implemented. So what do you expect from the implementation when it comes to rewarding not just price, but also rewarding additional components like sustainability, like made in Europe?
We currently had recently 2 examples on that discussion. One in Germany, the resilience bonus, where the idea was to make a kind of European-made bonus scheme. We have a current discussion, and I would say the German one did not work out. I think the problem was that it ended up at the end again, okay, that's a new subsidy for PV. I think it was not understood. It's not a subsidy to get more PV. It's a subsidy to get sovereignty in our energy supply. And I think this discussion was missing and was very confusing. I have the same situation now in Austria, but at least I would say the chances to get the European bonus in Austria is a very high one at this very moment. Let's cross fingers. That would be good because maybe it then spreads to other countries. This European-made bonus is not going to give us a real let's say, advantage on a cost side, because we speak here about 30 euros per kilowatt for European models and European inverters. So that's not so much, but at least it's bringing the discussion back to the customer stable who decides, do I use a Chinese or a European component? And that's already a help, which is, of course, highly appreciated. And it would be an add-up bonus to the rest. The Net Zero Industrial Act, I would say on a target level, it's great. So when I read there what we want to achieve, I love principally each chapter there and say, but if we could manage that in Europe to go there, great, 40% of European manufacturing on the yearly volume and all this kind. Thumbs up, very good job. When it comes to the tools, I fear a little bit that it's not going far enough. I mean, public tenders and auctions are also good, but currently public tenders and auctions represent maybe 20% of the market. So 80% are not in the discussion. And again, when it comes then to the opportunity or the possibility that countries make their own, let's say, bonuses for sustainability, for example, European made, there's also this limitation to 5% of the costs for the final customer, which can be subsidized. And if I take now this 5% again, compared to an IRA, where a manufacturer could save maybe 50% of manufacturing costs, it's not creating a real level playing field. So the first step is always important, but I just want to say I think we need to be more ambitious in this in this moment to really create a stronger and growing industry, not keeping it here, but growing it to 40%. And at the inverter side, we still have really the chance to save something because the capacities are here, the know-how is here. I would say the race on the module side, unfortunately, we saw that also the last months, we are really losing the race on the module side to keep the production here. I hope there is still chance also to build them up also here in Europe.
But indeed, it is a good basis for inverters as well. But we need to go beyond. This is what you're saying. You've been mentioning, Carlos, that standards will also have to play a very important role. And we've been already talking about grid forming capabilities. Let us shed a little bit more light on also on the development of new voltage levels and the role of standards, new voltage levels ranging from low to medium. So how are you looking at that?
Well, we are working on that. I mean, the inverters are currently working in low voltage, so there is this evolution which is more cost effective, just to run the inverter in medium. We are working in a product which has voltage higher than 2000 volts. I mean, we have some R&D resources. We have some agreements with academic institutions. Even we have been trying to produce a pilot plant working on that voltage. But the point with the medium voltage inverter are not only the technological one. I mean, the challenges are you have to bear in mind the lack of components that could handle this high voltage, the additional risks from safety from a safety point of view, because it's more dangerous to work with 2000 volts than to work with 1500. And above all, the regulation. I mean, coming back to the standards, we need, just to start working in medium voltage, we need to standardize the regulation about this point. It's the key. So we are working on that. We don't see that this change is going to happen in the short term, but we want to be prepared. And well, before I would like just to to highlight the one idea that Marco was talking about, because I think all of these tables are agree. I mean, the challenges of the price against our Asian competitors. I mean, I agree that we don't need a seat belt. What we need is to play with the same rules. I mean, and net zero is a step. I agree, but it's as power electronics, we have an important part of our share in US, and we feel more protected there being European that we are in Europe, and this is something that I think. Again, net zero is one step, but I think we have to be more ambitious. I mean, we have to work harder on that, because it's we are here, so we want to keep here and keep growing. So,
thanks a lot, Carlos. And the last element from the report I want to pick up on is cybersecurity, Matthias. Cybersecurity is also a topic which obviously is very high on the agenda of the European Commission. We heard that there's the Cyber Resilience Act already, which is foreseeing some further development and also some standards in that space. It is also something that attracts public attention, obviously, and is something that probably also in the future the European Commission should look at when developing a new energy strategy, energy security strategy for Europe. So my question to you is, the cybersecurity rules that have been set in the Cyber Resilience Act, is that enough? Is that sufficient for the inverter industry? What is it that we might still need more in that space?
I mean, it's at least a good start. But again, here, I mean, we are facing a situation where we're competing with companies outside Europe that have very strong R&D budgets, that have very big R&D teams. So they can also design secure systems, but we somehow have to make sure that it is kept within Europe. And this is the challenge, we need rules where we can keep the things within Europe. And cybersecurity is one, from my perspective, one of the most important topics. I mean, we have seen, and we looked at competitors that have very low standards for password rules, for example, and we've seen some hackers that just tried to attack inverters, which was very simple for them. And as we have more and more generation provided by inverters on the grid, I mean, you can easily attack inverters. And if you want to do it on a professional level, you could bring the grid in a situation where it's not stable anymore. I mean, I'm not a person who is afraid of such things, but we have to be very careful, especially in times where, where international hackers are more and more focusing in let's say, getting into Western countries and organizations and weaken them by cyber attacks. So coming back to your question, yes, it is a good start, but we need to look into the details that it's made in a way that we are really protecting the European Union and not only, let's say, making secure rules.
Thanks, Matthias. So I think we have a whole bundle of tools we've been discussing already. So the toolbox is there, the tools are there. There still might be a little bit too weak, the tools. The Net Zero Industry Act is for sure one of the tools which will help, but could lack a little bit of ambition. We signed the Solar Charter just recently together with 23 member states. What is the next steps? Maybe a short reaction from you, Kerstin. How can we bring that on the ground and maybe look also into how we can be a bit more ambitious?
Ambition is not my issue. We're very ambitious. And, I do take as a compliment that you give us credit for the incredible innovation as a regulatory matter we did on Net Zero Industry Act, on IPCEI. This is breaking so many taboos. For example, the taboo that We regulate at EU level and member states implement at national level. To have a single harmonization procedure, a single and harmonized permitting procedure in Europe is a complete innovation. Okay, and you're all in the innovation business. You always know when you have an innovation, you think it's great, everybody else says, it's not going to work. And, show me that it is. And can it do this? It can't. Well, and you can't tell me. So, it's really bad innovation. Don't be so. But this is the reaction we get. But I think compare it to how you think about your innovation that you're doing. You just have to continue to believe in it. And I can assure you, we will talk. Not only talk, it's in the regulation. So give us a bit of credit. And of course, you can always be more ambitious. But, let's get this done. That would be pretty amazing. Because in fact, we are moving away from a level playing field in the single market to a single playing field. And that's pretty awesome if you want to scale as a company. Single, same procedures, all in regulation, no national rules that override, gold plate or divert attention. So, I close the advertising break here. Then on, what's the right thing to stabilize your business model, which is under cost constraint? There are different ways. There's the IRA way, you order rain to fall from the sky. But honestly, you also have to get it done. Even with the money that you get, you need to make it a business model. And that means you need to find demand as well. And you need to be able to reach your demand side. Giving I'm just making a random example, $3 per kilogram of hydrogen is good if you produce hydrogen. But how does it get to your customer? How do you transport it? And how do you get a customer to actually have a long-term purchase agreement, which is in fact your OPEX if you produce, if they can't get the stuff? So in Europe, we have an approach where we try to scale supply and demand at the same time, and to make sure that also, physically they can match through infrastructure, through standards, how to transport the hydrogen, and to look at the whole value chain and to make the whole value chain move. And that's, I would say, the revolutionary thing about Net Zero Industry Act and also Critical Raw Materials Act for that matter, is to look also at the market, to look and to make the market evolve. And Cyber Resilience Act, the rules we have on sustainability, they all make the market evolve. I note your number, 20% of the inverter market is public procurement. I think we can work more on that, and we can also get private operators interested in having cyber resilient equipment. The people in my mine, what it would mean if that mine could be stopped anytime. And it couldn't work. That's also an economic risk. So I think the example about the market creation, where we use 14% of GDP, that's public procurement every year, to use that to create also more a broader market. I don't think there's a panacea, there's a silver bullet. We need all of these things to work together. We invented the hydrogen bank, which probably in future will no longer be only hydrogen and will no longer only be bank. So we maybe have to find a new name. But the idea here is to actually get to that premium. So we have a competitive call for those producing hydrogen. What's the lowest cost you can produce this for? And then we have a competitive call also for those who use hydrogen. What's the price you could afford per kilogram? And then, of course, there's a delta. And we finance the delta in between with the hydrogen bank to make it a market, to make supply and demand meet. And actually, whenever I meet the Americans, there's quite a lot of discussion. Yeah, how do you do this demand thing? And I see that, it's a more long-term way to deal with it. So I would say on your industry, your business case, prospects are bright, and we have to make sure that we scale your supply side and the demand side in a very smart way at the same time. And I think we've put some things in the landscape, in the regulatory landscape also to help. I know nothing about the voltage. I'm happy to learn much more. I only have a question. Do you need special steel for that? Because that could be another kind of, do you need this electric steel, transformer steel to do that? Because then we have another possible business case. So there are many we can scale in the single market.
Cool. But the transformer has to be different, yeah.
Okay, a lot of things that we still need to further discuss. It was already kind of a closing remark that you just said, spreading, the umbrella that you were picturing here over the discussion. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining. Thanks also for still mentioning one element that has not been touched on yet, which is the hydrogen bank, which we do hope will be extended indeed. That was one of our main asks to solar as well. So you've given us a little bit of an opening here, which is great. I do think it is clear we have an industrial base for inverters that we need to keep. We've been discussing the different elements that we need. The next steps is to get member states in order to have an IPCEI, but to also help us on other bits and pieces, and to have a very good discussion also with grid operators. They also know about the importance, so this will be also one of the next steps that we need to take. I would like to thank everyone to join the debate. I would also like to thank everyone here in the room and the ones who are watching us back home. Thanks very much. We will take this to the next level, and we will be happy to work with all stakeholders, and very happy to have your support as well, Kerstin, from the European Commission side, to make things happen and to keep the inverter industry thriving in Europe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.